Thank you all for joining us. I am Olivia Katrandjian, and on behalf of IALA, the International Armenian Literary Alliance, welcome to the launch of Don't Look Away, our literary series for Artsakh. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Azerbaijan and Armenia fought for control of Nagorno-Karabakh, a mountainous, ethnically Armenian territory known to Armenians as Artsakh. After a war that claimed some 30,000 lives, in 1944, a ceasefire was reached, but not a lasting diplomatic resolution, creating what has been termed a frozen conflict. The Armenians of Artsakh have declared independence and exercised democratic self-governance free of Azerbaijan's control, but the country's autonomy has never been recognized by the outside world. We are here because after years of relative quiet and intermittent firing, on September 27th, Azerbaijan, encouraged and aided by Turkey, launched a massive assault on Artsakh. For 2 weeks, Artsakh has been under relentless attack. These were not border clashes or heightened tensions, but premeditated and overt war. Azerbaijan targeted not only military forces, but also residential neighborhoods and vital infrastructure like hospitals and schools. Evidence shows they deployed lethal cluster munitions on civilian populations, some of which failed to detonate and are left behind to inflict suffering on civilians for decades. Stepanakert, once the densely populated and vibrant capital of Artsakh, is now a ghost town after being bombarded by drone fire and missile strikes. Entire neighborhoods have been reduced to rubble, leaving hundreds homeless. Turkey's involvement in the offensive is alarming. In July, Erdogan promised to fulfill the mission our grandfathers have carried out for centuries in the Caucasus, a statement with clear echoes of the Armenian genocide. Both France and Russia have alleged that Turkey has deployed hundreds of mercenaries from Libya and northern Syria to fight on the front line against Armenia, claims that have been supported by independent news reports. Armenians fear this assault is a continuation of genocidal policy and an attack on our existence as a people. A decade ago, I traveled to Artsakh as a member of the Armenian Volunteer Corps and Birthright Armenia. I was welcomed for a meal in the historic Gazanchastots Cathedral in Shushi, which was shelled this week while women and children hid in the basement, and then shelled again as journalists filmed the destruction from inside. I learned the resilience of the people when I visited a rehab center and met a child who could only move 2 fingers, but managed to sculpt and paint. I walked through the trenches on the front line and spoke with soldiers stationed there. Even though I was fresh out of college, I was struck by how young they seemed. Hundreds of soldiers and civilians on both sides have died in the recent fighting. Half of Artsakh's population, 75,000 people, have been displaced. Armenians all over the world have mobilized. Even those who do not know someone directly affected by the violence feel the raw need to stand up against those threatening our survival and to protect the democracy Armenians fought so hard to achieve. A temporary ceasefire went into effect today to pause combat long enough to collect bodies and exchange prisoners. We must engage in dialogue, not only to put an end to war, but to make peace. We are here today to provide context to the conflict in the hope that you will spread the word and to raise money to support those who have lost their homes and those who have lost a loved one. We are also here to share our stories, our culture, our poetry. Over the past 30 years, Azerbaijan has engaged in a systematic erasure of the country's historic Armenian heritage, including the destruction of churches and crosstones called Kashkars dating back to the 6th century. The government's intention is not only to take over land and drive out the Armenian people, but to eradicate our culture. We are here to preserve our rich tradition of storytelling and to ask you to bear witness. We are here to voice protest against the reprehensible violence in Artsakh, to voice protest against the lives lost on both sides of this conflict. We are not here to express hatred. There are good-hearted people of Azerbaijan and Turkey who do not support their oppressive, autocratic regimes. By no accident, this attack was launched in the midst of a pandemic, and just before the most important presidential election of our lifetime. The headlines are clogged with crises, but the international media must strive to report this conflict accurately. The world must not look away from the plight of the Armenians and must intervene. You can take direct action. Go to anca.org to contact your representatives to ask Congress to pressure Baku to accept lasting peace, cut off all military aid to Azerbaijan being used against Armenian civilians, and denounce Turkish interference in the conflict. Donate through our Facebook fundraiser to support the Armenian people who have lost their loved ones, their homes, their schools, and their hospitals. Visit our website, armenianliterary.org, to learn more about the conflict from trusted sources, and for other ways to contribute. Thank you for being here, for listening, for spreading the news. Thank you for not looking away. This is not just an Armenian issue, it is a human rights issue, and we must not remain silent. Without further ado, it is my honor to introduce our first speaker, Lory Bedikian. Bedikian is the author of the Book of Lamenting, which was awarded the Philip Levine Prize for Poetry. These are poems that make a rare intersection between history, the intimacy of memory, and an unswerving attention to craft, wrote Irish poet Eben Boland. A pure pleasure lives in the Book of Lamenting, but never purely for the sake of art. These fluid, urgent lines engage the humanity we all share through memory, said Youssef Komunyakaa. Bedikian is the recipient of numerous grants and awards. Her work was included in the 2015 anthology Wide Awake, Poets of Los Angeles and Beyond, and in the 2020 anthology Borderlines, Poems of Migration. Welcome, Lory. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Olivia. Such an honor to read with all of you today. You know, I didn't know quite how to begin this reading. It was one of those, where do I begin? What do I say first? And then I thought of my father. And when I was a young girl, he spoke to me of the Native American people. He would say, as Armenians, you know, we should be able to recognize their suffering, respect their history, support them in their plight, et cetera, et cetera. And I wondered as a young girl, why is he telling me this? But now, you know, I realized that what he taught me was quite basic, that no experience that we have should be wasted, and that we should have compassion toward other groups. What we view as the other, right? We always view the other, should strengthen the fabric of humanity. We should look at the other in a different light, always, you know, not with necessarily what we've been taught. I don't know. He taught me basically that ethnocentrism, without it, we can achieve tolerance. Without that, the appreciation of other cultures and other people. Those who have suffered or come before us, you know, when those of us who have suffered or know of people who have suffered or ancestrally we have suffered, we need to rise up. There's no other way to say it. There's no other way to achieve peace unless we all rise up. And my wish today, Olivia, I know you mentioned something very similar to this. My wish today is for harmony. And I read for those in favor of harmony, and no matter where they come from, no matter who they are. I don't know. I personally believe that humanity can be greater than this. I think that humanity can be greater than this. I admire these words from the great Jimi Hendrix, who said, "When the power of love overcomes the love of power, the world will know peace." I'll begin with my opening poem in the Book of Lamenting, Beyond the Mouth. Beyond the mouth. On the back of every tongue in my family, there is a dove that lives and dies. At night, when my aunts and uncles sleep, the birds comb their feathers, sharpen beaks. They are carriers not only of the olive branch, but the rest of our histories too. As from the ark, we came in twos with tired eyes from Lebanon, Syria, the outskirts of Armenia, anywhere safety said its final prayers and died. Like every simile ever written, the doves on our tongues are tired and misread. Dinners begin with mounds of bread, dialogues piled between the older men. Near our dark throats, the quiet birds lurk to watch meals descend, take phrases that didn't reach the truth and spin them into nests. Now and then, we spit them out in shapes of seeds, olive pits, spines of fish. The men never watch what enters past their teeth, what leaves their moving lips, and the doves know this. The women shut their mouths when they don't approve of the squawking laughs. There is a saying, or at least there should be, that if one doesn't believe what is said or true, they can ask the dove on the back of the tongue, and it will chirp the ugliness or the pitted truth of how we choke on what we hide. I read this next poem for those who have to constantly endure the distances of this world definitely during these great times of distress. I'm thinking particularly of my relatives in Lebanon who recently went through much with the explosions and all the horrors that have happened there. Letter from Beirut. Dear cousin, the country is on fire again. Today, rockets hit nearby. Lebanon is so small, everything can be heard. For years, we have known the language of bombs. But tonight it is quiet. The country is falling. People have fled their homes. Children are dead. Here in the eastern part, we are safe for now. Sorry for writing you late. Everything is shut down. I have no work. Indoors most of the time. We sit and wait for news. Our lights flicker on and off like the winter moon. People's hearts have turned hard as rocks. No one walks the streets. Only the old men at the corner argue until dusk. They are so close to death, they don't tremble as we do. For now, this much. It is difficult to write. Our ears are accustomed to explosions and running feet. But tonight it is so quiet, so silent, you could hear the strike of a match. This poem is I read this in memory of my grandmother, Sepahbodi. How they appear. No one understands the ghosts we know. They are floating hieroglyphics of flame. I say to people, look further so you can see their shapes, faces clear as thunder. Grandmother and I sketch them while awake, flashing in the midday sun like copper pennies. When I leave her side, the ghosts drag themselves as leaves into the subway's stairwell. And as I work, some stay with her, braiding her hair down the length of our street. I see ghosts in the ice of a cocktail, see them hanging from branches of a willow tree. When sounds stir in the coffee, I write what they creak. How can I begin to tell disbelievers their names? How can I begin to show the fear these ghosts know, like the screaming crow flying from a hurricane? And I'll close with this poem. Adrienne Rich has said, the beauty of darkness is how it lets you see. So, I've been thinking about this. Perhaps the darkness we're experiencing right now, in many facets of our lives right now, including the struggles we're having today, can assist us in sort of reinventing how we look at ourselves, how we look at the world, our neighbors, anybody. Perhaps we can be witness and then use that to enact change and progress, just changing the way we look, changing the way we see, like Rich so intelligently and wisely has said in the past. So thank you again, and it's an honor to be here. Self-portrait with Crane. On road trips, no coastal fog rolling in brings me the seagull or sandpiper shifting from water to sky, but the common Armenian crane, who treks across the Atlantic, breaks through California clouds, haunts the laurels, the eucalyptus, a message tucked in its beak. In riffs strummed on Midwestern guitars, I can hear the duduk hound me with its drone of apricot wood, piping a monotone dirge, driven like the tumbleweed. In New Mexico, each flute player's eye turns into the pomegranate seed. Going east should bring foliage, but I see the blue eye in trees. For days, New England's sediment drops into riverbeds, bends into Gorky's brush strokes. No relief. Ghosts float west from Ellis Island, crosses tattooed on their forearms, worry beads pebbled in their grip. Even as I watch the World Series, a fly ball turns into the crane. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Lory. Carolyn Forché is a poet, activist, translator, and memoirist who coined the term poetry of witness. The former director of the Lannan Center for Poetics and Social Practice, she's currently a professor of English at Georgetown University. Forché has published several volumes of poetry, including the award-winning Gathering the Tribes and The Country Between Us, and her most recent collection, In the Lateness of the World. Her groundbreaking anthology, Against Forgetting, was described by Nelson Mandela as itself a blow against tyranny, against prejudice, against injustice. Forché is the recipient of numerous honors, including the Academy of American Poets Fellowship and the Wyndham Campbell Prize. Her recent work, What You Have Heard Is True, a memoir of witness and resistance, was a finalist for the National Book Award for nonfiction. In our deeply bifurcated world, Hilton Als wrote, Forché's best writing engages in a kind of dialectic, one in which the truth of experience burns as brightly as the author's intuition and imagination. It is my great pleasure and honor to welcome her today to this series, Against Forgetting. One second.
All right. Thank you so much, Olivia, and thank you for your reading, Lory. I want to extend my greetings and solidarity to the people of Armenia and their descendants all over the world in this time of peril and agony for the community. Against Forgetting begins with the section on the Armenian genocide, which Peter Balakian, who's with us today, helped me to choose poems for. And one of those poems is by Vahan Tekayan, and I'd like to open with an Armenian poem by Vahan Tekayan in English translation as an invocation. Vahan Tekayan survived the Turkish execution of over 2 million Armenians in 1915 because he was in Jerusalem on business. When news of the genocide reached him, he left Jerusalem for Cairo, where he lived in exile until his death in 1945. Forgetting. Forgetting. Yes, I will forget it all, one after the other. The roads I crossed, the roads I did not. Everything that happened and everything that did not. I am not going to transport anymore, nor drag the silent past or that me who was more beautiful and bigger than I could ever be. I will shake off the weights thickening my mind and sight and let my heart see the sun as it dies. Let a new morning's light open my closed eyes. Death, is that you here? Good morning. Or should I say, good dark? I'm going to read now a few poems from my new book, In the Lateness of the World, beginning with a book about a refugee. It's called The Boatman. This refugee was from Homs in Syria. And he gave me his story on the condition that I would write about him. The Boatman. We were 31 souls, he said, in the gray sick of sea, in a cold rubber boat, rising and falling in our filth. By morning, this didn't matter. No land was in sight. All were soaked to the bone, living and dead. We could still float, we said, from war to war. What lay behind us but ruins of stone, piled on ruins of stone? City called Mother of the Poor, surrounded by fields of cotton and millet. City of jewelers and cloak makers, with the oldest church in Christendom and the sword of Allah. If anyone remains there now, they would be utterly alone. There is a hotel named for it in Rome, 200 meters from the Piazza di Spagna, where you can have breakfast under the portraits of film stars. There, the staff cannot do enough for you. But I am talking nonsense again, as I have since that night we fetched a child, not ours, from the sea, drifting face down in a life vest, its eyes taken by fish or the birds above us. After that, Aleppo went up in smoke, and Raqqa came under a rain of leaflets warning everyone to go. Leave, yes, but go where? We lived through the Americans and Russians, through Americans again, many nights of death from the clouds. Mornings surprised to be waking from the sleep of death, still unburied and alive, with no safe place. Leave, yes, we'll obey the leaflets, but go where? To the sea to be eaten? To the shores of Europe to be caged? To camp misery and camp remain here? I ask you then, where? You tell me you are a poet. If so, our destination is the same. I find myself now the boatman, driving a taxi at the end of the world. I will see that you arrive safely, my friend. I will get you there. And I'm going to close with a poem called Letter to a City Under Siege, because of the siege that is happening now in Artsakh. The siege in this poem is Sarajevo. Turning the pages of the book you have lent me of your wounded city, reading the braille on its walls, walking beneath ghost chestnuts, past fires that turn the bullet-shattered windows bronze, flaring an instant without warming the fallen houses where you sleep without water or light, a biscuit tin between you. Or later in the cafe ruins, you discuss all night the burnt literature borrowed from a library where all books met with despair. I wanted to give your notes back to you, to be printed in another language, not yours or mine, but a tongue understood by children who make bulletproof vests out of cardboard. We will then lie down in the cemetery where violets grew in your childhood, before snipers fired on the city using gravestones for cover. Friend, absent one, I can tell you that your tunnel is still there, mud-walled and hollowed of earth, dug for smuggling oranges into the city. Oranges, bright as winter moons by the barrow load. So let's walk further up the street, to the hill where one is able to see the city woven in fog, roofs filled with sky, uprooted bridges, and a shop window where a shard of glass hangs over the spine of a book. The library burns on page 60, as it burns in all the newspapers of the world. And the clopping of horses' hooves isn't the sound of clopping horses. From here, a dog finds his way through snow with a human bone. And what else? What more? Even the clocks have run out of time. But my good friend, the tunnel. There is still a tunnel for oranges. Thank you.
Thank you, Carolyn. Thank you for being here and for sharing your work. Wow. Next, we have Astvatsaturian Turcotte. She is an author, lecturer, and human rights advocate. Born in Baku, Azerbaijan, she and her family fled to Armenia as refugees in 1989 before immigrating to the United States. In 2012, she published Nowhere, A Story of Exile, based on a diary she kept while her family faced ethnic violence in Baku during the Nagorno-Karabakh War. She's lectured extensively, including on Capitol Hill and before the European Parliament, on issues of human rights, international law, and anti-Armenianism, and has defended the political rights of Armenians to establish autonomy in Artsakh. She is the recipient of several awards, including the Miktar Gosh Medal from the Republic of Armenia, and has spearheaded numerous humanitarian projects in Armenia and Artsakh, including planting a forest in memory of the victims and survivors of the Baku pogroms. Welcome, Anna. Thank you for being here.
Thank you very much for having me. I am completely dumbfounded that I'm among such great writers. Just a brief introduction about who I am. I am not a writer. At a heart, perhaps I am, but I began writing as a child when we first experienced Sumgait pogroms living in Baku. My grandmother, who was a teacher of Russian language and literature, encouraged me, instead of stressing and asking questions that she couldn't answer, to start writing in a diary. And I began writing at 10 years old and all throughout my adolescence, coming to the United States. When we first arrived to the United States, I wanted to preserve what occurred to us for my children. And I began translating my diary for my future kids between the ages of 14 and 16. So this book, Nowhere, A Story of Exile, I published in 2012, is really written by me between those ages. So I feel like I'm a totally different person now, and I truly can't take credit for it now. We fled Baku at the end of 1989 and arrived to Armenia, where we lived for 3 years in horrific conditions during blockade. I came to the United States at the age of 14, went to law school, and truly wanted to forget. After I translated the diary, I stopped writing. I stopped writing the diary. I stopped writing poetry. I went to law school and I wanted to do human rights work, but never really dealt with what happened to us. And in 2012, a little after my daughter was born, my second child, I related to her in a sense that the childhood that she had was completely, the childhood that she had was completely different from the childhood that I had. And I started reading more and more about Artsakh, and Artsakh was still fighting the same things that occurred to me as a child, whether it's being attacked at 11 years old or hiding for being Armenian. These things were still happening to my people in Artsakh, and I felt like it was not a private story anymore, not just for my children, but it needed to be published and read. A great Tatu Sonens Papazian edited for me, and he left the language of a child. So it is really written in the way that I've written it when I was a child. I've lectured extensively for the people of Artsakh for the last 8 years, nonstop. I've been doing this nonstop because really the diaspora didn't grasp the dangers that the people of Artsakh were in. I mean, we're observing this now. It's not a surprise anymore, but it was a surprise to a lot of people. They would visit Armenia. They would sometimes go to see Artsakh. And Stepanakert is beautiful and peaceful and nothing could ever happen to it. But we know now that that's not the case. It is my true belief that anti-Armenianism, just like anti-Semitism, cannot be rooted out without justice, cannot be rooted out without speaking out. I cannot expect the survivors of Baku pogroms to speak out the way I do. I've lived with the nightmares, and every time I speak about it, and in fact, I only read my book once, right before it was published, and I rarely do any reading, so forgive me if I get emotional. I haven't really read it since 2012, so, but here it is, my words at the age of 10. Don't you dare approach that window. The teacher gets up and gets closer to the window herself. Her back to the wall, she looks over her shoulder for several minutes as we sit quietly. The room where we have our English class every day is on the second floor. When the teacher, Mama's good Azeri friend, returns to her desk, we ask her what's going on. They're calling on the upperclassmen to join the demonstrations and to go to the gathering on the Lenin Square, she replied. The Azeri upperclassmen, in spite of the teacher's objections, start yelling and screaming to be allowed to go outside and join the demonstrators. One upperclassman jumps from the second floor window and runs toward the street behind the brick fence. The director and the teachers call after him, begging him to return. The student returns, probably fearing a parental reprimand. Seeing that they cannot persuade the students to come out, and angry at the teachers, the demonstrators start throwing rocks and other debris through the window. They shatter the panes of every window on the first floor and a few on the second. Several days later, the demonstrators didn't stop at the breaking the windows. They broke into the school building and threatened to beat up the students of attending Russian school. They were hoping to find Armenian students. I was on the second floor, and the teacher told us to stay in our classroom, and at one point ordered us to hide under the desk and to be quiet. We later found out that another teacher prevented potential violence against the children. He dropped to his knees in the lobby of the school and cried and begged for demonstrators to leave, promising them that they would bring their students to the Lenin Square the following day. The demonstrators beat him up severely but left. The teacher was covered in bruises and lacerations. Despite the promise to the demonstrators, the school administrators decided it would be unreasonable to involve the minors in politics. Besides, our director was Azeri and a communist. Although she was a nationalist, she was reluctant to risk her career angering the Russian government. The demonstrations appeared to happen almost every day. The huge railroad plant where they fixed engines and wagons is located right across the street from our apartment building. Work never stops there, even during demonstrations, and the trains never stop rumbling by our garden on the way from the waterfront. When the demonstrators pass the factory, they scream and demand that the workers stop working, like everyone else, and join the gatherings. Even young women participate in the marches and pound on the iron gates of the factory with their handbags to attract the attention of workers. Looking through the crack in the wooden blinds, I watch these young women and I think how badly dressed they are and how they are lacking in manners becoming of a young woman. They are no ladies. The swinging purses and the sound of shattered glass falling on the pavement, leaving the windows of the factory as dark, gaping squares, interrupt my thoughts. The workers remain inside. No one comes out. The national news reports nothing of the violence in my city. Time flew by, and this is when we are already in Yerevan, January 1990. Time flew by, and before we knew it, winter was almost over. One day we received a letter from Grandma, which described that for many months after we left, strange people kept wandering around our building. She used these stories as a preface to something else she was about to describe. One evening, she said, during the riots and demonstrations, a group of 5 to 7 men came into the patio and directly went to Vilya's apartment on the second floor. They had batons in their hands. These batons were infamous for instantly breaking a bone. Some of the men carried other dangerous objects like knives and clubs. The men broke into Vilya's apartment and beat up Vilya's grandmother in their hallway. This happened during the evening hours, and Vilya was there to witness the violence. Grandma couldn't tell us if he himself was hurt. They didn't touch his mother, Jana, who was daughter of an Azeri father, making her an Azeri. But they did beat up her 65-year-old mother in front of her. No one had ever heard such horrifying screams like the ones that came from Jana's throat when she pleaded for them to stop beating her already unconscious old mother. Jana screamed and tore off her long hair, and the men were holding her back as their friends beat an old woman, but they didn't stop. The thugs left very suddenly, and when Jana died, her death was surprising and instant. A heart attack killed her. Her heart literally broke. Her mother, Leah, was injured but alive. Jana, an eccentric yet beautiful woman in her mid-30s with long black hair and big, passionate dark eyes, was dead. I was dumbfounded when I heard the news. Jana always looked like a movie star to me with her Roman nose, flawless makeup, wavy hair, and Marilyn Monroe hips. She was always dramatic, but this was different. I felt sick to my stomach and I wanted to scream. Leah was in a hospital in the Russian city of Sevastopol, while Vilya was said to be in hiding somewhere with a relative. We kept hearing similar stories from relatives and friends who had left Baku. The pogroms of January 1990 left many dead, and I shivered thinking it could have been us who were there just a few months ago. Grandma said that there was a list of Armenian names and addresses in the original City Hall building. The list was given to these thugs, and they were the names of Armenians to be killed on every street of the city by address, including ours. Gangs of bloodthirsty monsters followed the names and addresses and went after the Armenian inhabitants of the city. Somehow Mama's name headed the list of our building, possibly because her maiden name was Adamian, first one alphabetically. When they came for her, Grandma hid. The neighbors said that Mama had moved and they left. Rahiba and Katya kept stealing from Jana's apartment until the government confiscated everything that was left to take. Soon we learned that during these January weeks, Gorbachev declared a state of emergency in Baku and brought back the troops and tanks to restore the order. On the night of the 16th, I had my first nightmare since we came to Moscow. The nightmares didn't bother me since we left Yerevan. I expected them to surface anytime soon, but when I awoke from it with a pounding heart and collected my thoughts, I was surprised. I wasn't dreaming of the ruined and burned down Baku. I dreamed of my school in Baku. In my dream, I'm standing at the top of the old marble stairway, waiting for something. The light from the wide window behind me is whiter than driven snow. I see my reflection in the marble floor under my feet and wait. I can see the entire stairway from there. I see everything. Suddenly, out of nowhere, a force grabs me, shakes me, and throws me down the stairs. The pain is unbearable. Everything is quiet except for my bones hitting the steps in an eerie slow motion. The silence is screaming in my ears as I hit the bottom. As I look up, lifting myself up in agony, I see every Baku classmate and my English teacher surrounding me. Their eyes are angry. Even Lucine Yemelia seemed to blame me in silence. My English teacher, Mama's good friend, puts both of her hands on her hips in disapproval, shaking her head back and forth slowly. Next, I am on my feet, and an argument was in progress. I tried justifying myself to them that this isn't my fault. Yes, it always was, they repeated in a monotonous voice. All I wanted was to see the garden again, I pleaded, and then darkness and coldness engulfed me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna, for having the courage to share and relive that story. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Peter Balakian, who's a professor at Colgate University, where he directs the Center for Ethics and World Societies. He's the author of 7 books of poems, including Ozone Journal, winner of the 2016 Pulitzer Prize, and 4 books of prose, including Black Dog of Fate, winner of the Penn Martha Albrand Prize for Memoir, and The Burning Tigress, the Armenian Genocide in America's Response, winner of the Raphael Lemkin Prize. Peter also co-translated Armenian Golgotha, a memoir of the Armenian Genocide by Peter Balakian. His work has been translated into over a dozen languages, and he is the recipient of the Presidential Medal and the Horanatsi Medal from the Republic of Armenia. Called The American Conscience of the Armenian Genocide, Peter's work inspired Elie Wiesel to write, "His visions are burning, his poetry heartbreaking." Poet David Wojan writes, "Few American poets of the boomer generation have explored the interstices of public and personal history as deeply and urgently as has Balakian. It is my honor to welcome him here today."
Thank you, Olivia, for your leadership here for the newly founded International Armenian Literary Alliance. And I'm just so grateful to be reading with my fellow writers today, and grateful that there are many people in attendance. And I want to note too that I have many great Turkish friends and colleagues here and abroad and in Turkey who are in solidarity with Armenians worldwide. This is a moment of high danger for Armenians of the Caucasus, which is to say, the northern part of the Armenian homeland. The southern and western parts of historic Armenia are occupied by Turkey today, and after the Turkish genocide of the Armenians in 1915, that part of historic Armenia is devoid of Armenians. Remember, Poland once had 3 million Jews, then it had none. Germany once had 500,000 Jews, then it had none. Turkey once had 2.2 to 2.5 million Armenians, and then it had none. One fact I would like to underscore about the war on Artsakh by Azerbaijan and Turkey, a fact that the media and the general public don't seem to have or understand. Artsakh has been Armenian since about the 2nd century BCE, and it has been and is a predominantly Armenian demography, with over 90% of the population Armenia through much of the 20th century, and at the time of the war for self-autonomy in 1992, similarly, more than 90% Armenian population. So it is important to understand Artsakh as a democratic nation formed by constitutional principles of the former USSR. It does represent a project of ethnic self-determination, something that might evoke President Wilson's goals for small nations a century ago. I'd like to read a few poems, and Carolyn's marvelous anthology, Against Forgetting, underscores in an inventive way that poems make history real, vital, present, and that language embodies the urgency of trauma and memory. And all of us here today are poking into that in our own ways. Like many Armenians of my generation, I have grandparents who were Armenian genocide survivors. And those figures and their revenants tend to inhabit our imaginations. My grandmother was the only survivor of a large family from Diyarbakir in southeastern Anatolia, Turkey, today. And this is an imagination of her arriving in Ellis Island, which indeed she did arrive in after a death march, 5 years in Aleppo, struggling to stay alive. This is called Ellis Island. The tides of Bach cantata. The beach is the swollen neck of Isaac. The tide's a lamentation of white opals. The beach is free. The Coke machine rusted out. Here's everything you'll never need. Hemp cords, curry combs, jade and musk, a porcelain cup blown into the desert. Stockings that walked to Syria in 1915. On the rocks, some ewes and rams graze in the outer dark. The manes of the shoreline undo your hair. A sapphire ring is fingerless. The weed and algae are floating like a bed. And the bloodless gulls, whose breaths would stink of all of us if we could kiss them on the beaks, are gnawing on the dead. And the revenant of the survivor, grandparent, or great aunt or uncle, however it may play out in one's life and legacy. In this poem, again, it's the grandmother's revenant who just kind of ripples a certain note in this poem, which is, the poem is called Eggplant. I love the white moon circles and the purple halos on a plate as the salt sweat them. The oil in the pan smoked like bad days in the Syrian desert when a moon stayed all day, when morning was a purple elegy for the last friend seen, when the fog of the riverbank rose like a holy ghost. My mother made those white moons sizzle in some egg wash and salt. Some parsley appeared from the garden, and summer evenings came with no memory but the table with white dishes. Shining aubergine, black-skinned beauty, bitter apple. We used our hands. And I want to switch landscapes for a second, because we are, of course, so inundated by violence. We're inundated by, here in the US, history and personal existence are in constant struggle with violence, personal and mass and political violence. This is a poem called Warhol Electric Chair 63, taking off on that Warhol silkscreen, a series of them. This is the red and green. The red spreads like Christmas wrapping. The green, a field and a Caucasian rug. It's almost beautiful without the metal plates for the head, though the plug on the floor is visible. Before decorator colors and Hockney, Calvin Klein in the summery Hamptons, before there were switches to break the flow. My mother used to say, never touch a radio when you're in the bathtub. Never fly a kite near transmission lines. But still, it's furniture. Still, it's a typical American way to go. It's Sing Sing, the silhouette of Ethel Rosenberg. In the rheostatic air, the absent man heard, "She loves you." The British invasion and the flat line arrived at once. Outside, Negroes were eaten by dogs. Johnson was sworn in. Cuba turned red in the green sea. And I want to just close with a poem that in some way is a meditation on a great Armenian instrument, the duduk, an ancient single reed instrument made of apricot wood. It has power, it's magical. It speaks a lot about history and survival. Ode to the duduk. It's not the wind I hear driving south through the Catskills. It's just bad news from the radio. And then a hailstorm morphs into sunlight. Look up, and there's an archipelago of starlings trailing some clouds. But how does the wind come through you, primordial, hollow, unflattened double reed, So even now, when bad news comes with the evening report, I can press a button on the dashboard and hear your breath implode the way wind blows through the slit windows of a church in Dilijan. Then a space in my head fills with a sound that rises from red clay dust roads and slides through your raspy apricot wood. Hiss of tires, wet tarmac, stray white lines, night coming like wet dissolve to pixelation. Praise to the glottal stop of every hoarse whisper, every sodden tree which speaks through your hollow carved wood, so we can hear the air flow over starlings rising and dipping as the mountains glaze the sun, so we can hear the bad news kiss the wind through your wetted reed.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much for reading your work. Our next speaker is Nancy Kricorian, who's a writer and activist. Her works include the novel Zabel, Dreams of Bread and Fire, and most recently, All the Light There Was, set in the Armenian community of Paris during the Second World War. She's an award-winning and widely published poet who has taught at Yale, Columbia, and Barnard colleges. In addition to her writing, Kricorian advocates for social justice. For over 10 years, she served on the national staff of Code Pink, the women-initiated grassroots peace and social justice movement, and was the campaign manager for Listen Hillary, an effort to push Hillary Clinton into more progressive stands on war and national security. She's a fellow of the Women Mobilizing Memory Project at Columbia and served on the board of the Armenia Tree Project. Among many honors and awards, Kricorian received the New York Foundation for the Arts Fellowship, the Anahit Literary Award, and a gold medal of the Writers Union of Armenia. Thank you for being here, Nancy, and sharing your work.
Thank you. Everybody, we were all feeling hopeful today that there was a ceasefire announced, and I just, Twitter addict that I am, just poked over there, and apparently they've started bombing Sepahbodi again. So I guess that ceasefire didn't hold. So what I'm going to read, three short pieces, 2 old ones, 1 new one, and that's it. There's a little bit I have to tell you about the second 2, but the first one is something that I wrote right after my grandmother died. It's called The Angel. My grandmother is in heaven. This heaven has no Turks, no women in skimpy bathing suits, no squirrels in the pear trees. Her mansion is very clean and there are plastic covers on the furniture. In the morning, she combs out her long hair and puts on a blue flowered dress. Jesus stops by for coffee and churt eggs. She claps her hands when she sees the fuchsia he has brought her. Grandma and Jesus sit in the kitchen and talk about plans for the new Armenian Cultural Center. They look at old photo albums and the day passes quickly. When it is supper time, Jesus goes back to his place next door. Knowing it will soon be dark in Watertown, my grandmother rings the bell for the angel. She gives the angel a 3 Musketeers bar for the trip. Just before I fall asleep, I hear the rustle of the candy wrapper behind my headboard. And I have to do one little anecdote here, which is that when I was a student at Columbia, I took a class with Carolyn, and we read Jean Follin prose poems, and this was sort of under the influence of that. The next one is called Homage to Borj Hamoud. The novel I'm working on now is actually set in Beirut during the Lebanese Civil War, and so I've made a few trips to Beirut, and I learned a lot about the Armenian municipality of Borj Hamoud, which was built by genocide survivors in the 30s. And this is a sort of brief, brief prose history of Borj Hamoud, this city, this town. And the epigraph is from Khalil Gibran and is, "Have you heard a thrush sing while its nest burns in the wind? Listen, in the morning you can hear the bright strike of hammers and the rasp of saws. Children carry sand from the riverbanks in their school satchels. First they build the church, then the school, and finally a house for each family according to its means. The tents and shacks are taken down one by one. Each family plants a mulberry tree and tends its garden. The remnants of Marash create a new Marash, and so also nor Sis, nor Adana, nor Giligia, and nor Hajin are made. You can hear the sounds of the trades learned in the orphanage workshops, carpenter's plane, sewing machine, and cobbler's bench. The sharp smell of the tannery is in the air and in their clothes. All Beirut wears their shoes. Look at the children outside the church in their freshly pressed clothes, and the girls have ribbons in their hair. Look at the food spread on the luncheon table and the hands that pass the platters. Someone has told a joke and there is laughter. Someone pulls an instrument from its case. Speak of those times or don't, when the parties take up arms against each other, how the women of one church throw boiling water out the window on the men with guns. When all Beirut stops fighting, for how many more weeks do the Armenian men continue to shed each other's blood? Speak then of the flowering. The neighborhood children grow tall. Among them are musicians, actors, painters, and poets. In this world, their parents have rebuilt from ashes. They now believe anything is possible and everything is new. Remember this. When the Civil War comes, neutrality is no amulet against the bullets and the bombs. Jewelers flee the downtown souk for Borj Hamoud, where the militiamen patrol the night and then also the day. So many boats leave the port. Carrying leather suitcases to the airports, so many are exiled again. Remember nor Adana, nor Marash, nor Sis. Men still play backgammon and grill meat on braziers on the sidewalk. Remember the narrow alleys and wooden houses of Sanjak camp, raised for a shopping plaza. O people of long memory, listen, look, speak, remember. Your stories are a homeland. And the last one I'm going to read, I wrote in the mid-90s after Monty Melkonian, who was an Armenian from California, it's all in this piece, was killed fighting in Artsakh. And this was before since I wrote this, I've been to Armenia several times, but this was about, it's called My Armenia, and it's about my imaginary Armenia because I hadn't yet been there. My Armenia. Armenia is a country where someone is always crying. Women punch in and out on the clock, grieving in shifts. 1895, 1915, 1921, the 30s, 1988, 1992, 1993, 1994. White handkerchiefs flutter in their careworn hands. The Armenian orphans have oversized heads and eyes the color of bitter chocolate. They don't complain about the harshest winter. They are grateful for the same dull food. In their faded uniforms, they sing off-key for visitors. Cher, who was born Carolyn Sarkisian, traveled to Armenia where she wore a scarf and kept her tattoos covered. She visited the orphans and brought them Barbie dolls. She said she would star in 40 Days of Musada. I want to direct a biopic of Commander Avo, Cher's distant cousin, who died a freedom fighter in Karabakh. How did Monty Melkonian of Visalia, California, come to join the Armenian Secret Army for the liberation of Armenia? The camera, the handkerchief, the rifle, the massacres. Monty dead in Artsakh, a shrapnel wound to the head. Plum blossoms, apricots. We will make a picnic under the trees, fresh bread, madzoun, cheese, garden greens. Children will race through the grass, and when the sun goes down, the field will be lit by the moon and 1,000 fireflies. The men drink raki and sing, a person dies only once, but fortunate is the one who dies for the freedom of his people. Are there fireflies in Armenia? Do the women edge their handkerchiefs with lace? Armenia is a country in my body, the right side only, because I'm half Armenian. I choose it, my imaginary homeland, my handkerchief, my name.
Thank you all. Thank you, Nancy. Thank you all so much for being here, for sharing your incredible work. Thank you to those who have donated to help the Armenians of Artsakh rebuild. To those of you who would like to donate, you can do so through our Facebook fundraiser, which the link to is in the chat. If you don't have Facebook, you can visit our website, armenianliterary.org, for a list of charities to donate to directly and to learn more about the conflict from credible sources. Go to anca.org to contact your representatives, to ask Congress and the White House to pressure Baku to accept lasting peace, to cut off all military aid to Azerbaijan being used against Armenian civilians, and to warn Turkey against sending arms and fighters to Baku. Thank you again so much to our speakers, and to everyone at the International Armenian Literary Alliance who made this possible, especially Arthur Kayzakian, John Parker de Boghossian, Levon Golandukin, Irene Katrandjian, and Olivia Katrandjian. Please join us next Saturday at 3 p.m. Eastern for the next installment of Don't Look Away, featuring Nancy Agabian, Alan Samerjian, Lola Kundakshin, Aline Terzian, and others. Thank you.